Welcome everyone. My name is Dent Wilkins. I am the Chief Marketing Officer at US Squash, joined here by US Squash President and CEO Kevin Klipstein and US Squash Chief of Programs. See, I just got that wrong. Chief Programs Officer Kim Klierken. Thank you so much for joining us for the annual meeting of the members tonight. We'll have about an hour session. As I announced to everyone at the beginning, you will see that you're automatically on mute and won't be able to take yourself off mute yet. We'll have an opportunity for question and answer later in the presentation. This meeting will be recorded and posted on YouTube after the session for anyone who's not able to join and for any of you that may have to drop off a little bit early. You will see throughout the meeting, there are a couple of times when motions will be made. There is at the bottom of your screen a reactions button, and from there you'll be able to raise your hand. So in the event any motions will be made, you can raise your hand to do those. There will also be 2 times throughout the meeting where we will have polls, and they will pop up on your screen, and those are just for the voting section of the official meeting. Same thing as we get to the question and answer session after the official period of the annual meeting. During the question and answer, you're welcome to either enter questions directly in the chat to me, and I will tee them up for Kevin and Kim, or feel free to raise your hand and we will bring you up and you can ask your questions live and in person. So with that, I will pass it off to Kevin, who will kick off the official portion of the meeting. Kevin.
Thank you, Dan. Nice to see everybody. This is our 3rd straight annual meeting of the members via Zoom. So I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge a few directors who appear to be on the call, Nick Lepore and Carrick Harden. So it's nice to have them on the call as well. The agenda will include, and I will share my screen here. All right, I think I got that right. The agenda will include calling to order, which we just did. We'll do the director elections and get that out of the way. I will present a bit of an update for US Squash along with Kim Klierken. We'll adjourn the meeting and then we'll open up to Q&A. So similar format to what we've had in the past. Happy to stay on to answer everybody's questions. Again, appreciate you dialing in. Some of you may have voted via proxy over the last 48 hours, so we will deduplicate the results. So if you did vote via proxy, there's no need for you to indicate support on this call. We are recording people's attendance, we'll have a US Squash staff member just verify people's membership status. So the nominees for Class 3 are just 2 re-nominations to the board. There are not currently any new nominations. Francis Johnson and Shannon Spector, their bios have been online really for more than 4 years. Francis Johnson is an executive from the Charlottesville area. He oversees a foundation as well as portfolio of software startup companies. So he's been very valuable as a director. And Shane Spector is the son of Arlen Spector and has been a generous contributor as well as a contributor on various committees, including our newly launched Sportsmanship and Character Committee. So 2 very valued members of the board, which the board has happily put forward for renomination to a 2nd term. As a reminder, 2 fully elected terms are the maximum for directors. The proxy voting has been tabulated. And so Dent, I think that it probably makes sense to proceed with the online voting here so that we can add these to that. So if I could get a motion to elect this slate of 2 directors, that would be wonderful. And as Dent mentioned, this is simply doing some sort of reaction via.
There's down at the bottom of your screen, there's a reactions button, and anyone can make the motion by simply raising their hand using that reaction button to approve this slate of directors. Okay, I've got Motion by Howard
All right.
Cooley and
Thank-
seconded by
Great.
Dan Reagan.
Great. Thank you very much.
So I'm going to
So-
launch the poll now. Everyone should see it on their screen in a second. We'll leave this open as answers come in. Give everyone about 10 more seconds here. Do see answers coming. All right, I'm going to close the poll now, and Kevin, I can report there was a unanimous vote for the ayes in favor of the slate for those voting as part of this meeting.
Okay, so supplementing those votes, we had online pretty overwhelming support for these directors. We feel like the proxy voting is a pretty effective way of determining whether there are any red flags with these directors. It's a process for nominations that we take very seriously, that the Nominating Governance Committee takes seriously, and so appreciate everybody's involvement in that. I wanted to move on to just a general update for the organization. It's obviously been a challenging 2 years, and we've had a lot of support from the membership and from the districts, and I want to thank them for that. And I want to describe just sort of where we're going to be focused moving forward. We've spent a lot of time and effort over the last several years in making sure we have a stable technology platform to support the growth of the game, as well as building the Specter Center, which really now is a home for the sport, home for the organization, home for our high performance athletes. It allows us to become really efficient in what we do, recognizing also that the Specter Center isn't everything we do, but leveraging it in every case to the extent possible to be an example of what is possible out there in the community around the country and supporting that. So we're really turning the organization to be one that is very focused on driving growth and supporting growth. And when we say driving growth, our main focus is on community affiliates. And the purest example of a community affiliate would be essentially a community squash center that is publicly open. People can show up and play. Maybe there's a fee, maybe there isn't. There's a membership portion. There are subsidized memberships, and there's programming from everything from narrow and deep squash and education to middle and high school programs to even some junior development programs that ultimately plug into our own high performance development pathway. There are programs like this and facilities like this around the country. There's an upswell of interest in it in more than 30 markets that we're trying to support along that process. And we very much view the Specter Center as one of those community affiliates. I would say subordinate to that, or part of our growth strategy, is to recruit and train more female coaches and also make a real push for parity and participation among girls and women. We've doubled the number of girls and women as a % of our membership in the last 10 years. However, we need to push all the way to getting to full parity, 50-50. And we've got some distance to travel. So a short-term goal for us is actually increasing it by 1,000 paid members this year, which would be 25% growth roughly. But we do feel like we need role models and more female coaches to help us do that. And we also need to coach and train the current coaches and teaching pros out there on the most effective ways to engage girls and women in the sport. We'll also continue to make investments in scholastic squash, which has grown tremendously over the last 10 years, and continue obviously to invest in our pipeline of athletes. It's important that junior players through college and post-college stay interested in performing at the highest level. So the second point is all of this really ultimately relies on what you might call our sales force, which is coaches and pros. And we need to make sure we're staying close with them, educating them, supporting them in their efforts to attract people and retain people in the sport. And a subsection of that clearly is having great officials. And officials sort of falls into a number of different categories, from, a court monitor to an actual referee to tournament directors. And all of these play important roles in having a positive experience in the sport. Third, we're always focused on our relationships. Being a small sport, one that relies on itself really to grow. The idea that we work in cooperation, collaboratively with other organizations within the sport is critical, and we feel like we're in really good shape on that front. Everything from college squash to the pro tours to SEA. So we'll continue to do that, and now take it to the next step, which is to say, hey, here are our goals 1 and 2. How can we work together to advance those? How can we get retiring pros to become coaches and role models? How can the PSA Foundation support some of our efforts in our core growth initiatives? Things such as that. And obviously working closely with college squash is critical. And then the final is just focusing on our priorities, which underlying infrastructure is technology and the Specter Center. So making sure we're being really efficient in running the Specter Center, getting the most out of that, and then figuring out, now that we have this asset called Club Locker, what do we do with it? How do we make sure we get the most out of it and be efficient? Our goals, as I mentioned, a couple of these: double the number of community affiliates, increase female membership 25%, put a full embrace around our teaching pros and coaches with a new certification affiliation with them. And part of this also is driven by just requiring a much closer relationship with our coaches and pros when it comes to things like training and safe sport, et cetera. But for us to be now viewed a little bit more as a resource for continued education in coaching. And coaching, we're talking about coaching beyond sort of the technical components of teaching squash on a court. That's really our area of focus. We still have the certification levels, but we need to go beyond that, as well as create a connection between the affiliates locally to regional affiliates all the way up to the Specter Center in terms of high performance pathways, with the ultimate goal of that being something that kids can tap into on a need blind basis. So if you have the talent and the drive, and you're in a sort of a distant part of the country to our areas of traditional strength, you can plug into a system that really doesn't cost you anything, that gets you the coaching that meets you where you are and carries you forward. So that's our long-term vision. And the faster we grow, the faster we can get to it. We're also ultimately focused on trying to get the organization to earn as much revenue as possible and rely as little as possible on contributions, so that any future contributions can go towards our growth initiatives. So to try and reduce our operating gap year over year is now a much larger focus, particularly as the organization is itself larger. And the final point I made about technology is just making sure that we're taking the right approach in the deployment of our technology. And that's something that we've had a task force evaluating over the last 6 or 8 months. Longer term, these align to our bigger picture goals, which I wouldn't anticipate changing for some time to come. Having 20 community affiliates out there in the country that are truly pure community squash facilities, full gender parity in squash participation, which would require a 300% increase in women and girls, double the number of public varsity programs in the country, and also have squash recognized in the state as a high school varsity sport, which usually requires a threshold of roughly 50 teams. So it's a high threshold. And if we can do that in a state or multiple states, that'd be a huge success for the sport. We want to increase the depth at the collegiate level, increase the number of varsity programs by 30% to make sure that we qualify for being included in the NCAA, but also cultivate an environment where emerging programs develop into club programs. I mentioned our excellence pathways, making sure that we're offering that on a need blind basis over time. And here, Olympic inclusion is something that we're working on very much behind the scenes in collaboration with World Squash and the PSA Tour. And it's nothing we can ever count on, but I would just say to this audience that rest assured, we are leaving no stone unturned in terms of doing what we can to make sure squash is putting its best foot forward on that front. In terms of leadership, the team has grown. We were sort of at our lowest point about a year and a half ago during the pandemic. We've grown to roughly 50 employees, particularly that we're operating a large center now. But our leadership team, newest to it, are Nick Kakaiko, who's the Vice President of Advancement Fundraising, and Melinda Berkman, who's our Chief Financial Officer. And then Dent Wilkins, who's on the call here, our Chief Marketing Officer, and Kim Clerkin, our Chief Programs Officer, who essentially oversees all programs and initiatives in the organization. We also have a General Manager, James Sneeder of the Specter Center, who oversees as an integration point all of our human resources, because that's much more of a function now than historically we needed. And then we have a Chief Technology Officer in Ryan Rayfield. In the middle here, we have Ned Edwards, who was the Specter Center Executive Director for the last 7 years as we ramped up the Specter Center and opened it. He remains in that role as a relationship builder, but not sort of day-to-day involved in the operations. And he's also our Chief of Sport Development. So for example, he is actually in Colorado Springs during the U.S. Olympic Committee Assembly, representing U.S. Squash, along with Sue Venkatesan, our board chair. And he is the one who's engaging for projects that are a little bit further along in terms of whether or not they might do a facility in a community. And so that's an area of focus for Ned. Financially, as I mentioned, we want to continue to reduce our operating gap. Our budget's in the range of between $8 and $9 million. Roughly a third of that we anticipate having to fundraise this year as we narrow the gap, operating gap in the Specter Center as we recover from COVID. So we have to raise more money than we have historically, which is the reason we've ramped up and have an actual department that's doing that work now. We also plan to increase membership dues. The dues have not gone up for 7 years. So from 2008 to 2015, the dues went up roughly 50%. And so we're anticipating a 50% increase since it's been 7 years. We feel like given the investments that we've made and the infrastructure that we have, that this is still a very fair value for what we offer to members and to facilities. And ultimately, at the end of the day, as I mentioned before, we're a small sport. We will only grow and develop with the work of the association and collaborating together. So by offering services that are actually valued and charging for it, we believe is the best way. And that's why we've invested in the technology to support that. We do expect to improve our margins on our events, particularly running out of Specter Center. We've always been roughly around break even if you include our shared costs. Now, as we get sponsors at the Specter Center and 4 events, that allows us to sort of go into surplus territory. So we're focused on that, and we're counting on being successful there. As I mentioned, fundraising, our needs are increasing. Thankfully, we're a 501c3, and this is something we've anticipated and scaled up to do. And we generally feel like there's an appetite in the community once we explain ourselves, what we do and how we do it, to support these initiatives. Payroll, we're trying to be very nearly parsimonious on this, keeping payroll flat, if not down, to make sure we're protecting against any downside related to the economy or any future COVID incidents, and trying to keep our costs under control. So this is our 2nd year at the Specter Center. We learned a lot in the 1st year. We're going to try and apply those learnings. So just to sort of shift into more programmatically what we're doing, what I'm focused on and what I'm excited about is last year, while we technically opened the center, we didn't have a whole lot of programming going on. And Kim will describe a little bit about our return to play activities back then. But now we have a full set of programs out of the Specter Center and a full set of accredited tournaments across the country. And we're fielding teams that are traveling internationally. So it's a whole different world, one that we're very happy to be supporting. US Open's coming up. That will be here at the Specter Center, the 8th to the 15th of October. We're working with Play LA, which is a highly funded program to get Los Angeles's youth involved in activities. So we're hoping to roll out a pilot this fall. Another reason we have to recruit outstanding coaches and pros and train them and place them. Scholastic Squash will have about 10 middle and high schools competing out of the Specter Center this year. It's one of the biggest public school leagues in the country. And we didn't get too much of a chance to show off the center to them last year because of COVID. So we're excited about that. US Squash Teams is a new event that we're planning on implementing, which is essentially a community builder where people from all over the country will be able to form teams based on different affinities, whether it be a school affinity, an age affinity, a facility affinity, and compete against one another. So it's meant to be a team-based event that's simply for fun and simply for coming together as a community. So we can look for more details on that throughout the summer. The Access Squash campaign is part of our overall sort of looking ahead in the 21st century. Now that we've funded the Specter Center, this is about funding our growth initiatives. Similarly, Collegiate Squash, a close partner of ours, we're very interested in supporting their bid to raise funds in order to make sure that they increase the number of varsity programs and sustain the number of programs that there are. So it's their 100th year celebration. So we're going to collaborate with them on celebrating that and fundraising. And then finally, just because put in the North American Junior Open. For a long time, we've wanted to host a major international junior tournament in the summer. So our hope is to do that June 2023. So I will hand it off to Kim now. We just have 3 more slides. But I'm excited about these things largely because of all the hard work that Kim has done and her team will be doing. So Kim, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Kevin. And Kevin put this slide on the slide chart. It just reminded me of like 2.5 years ago, March 2020, when COVID struck and we were cancelling all of our tournaments, and we came up with this plan to return to play, which we've been able to enact over the last 2 years as COVID has progressed, as the pandemic has progressed. So as you can see, like we started there with phase 0. Fortunately, we've gone through those phases, and last September we started our return to competition. So we're right at that, the right hand end there. So since last September, last summer, we've been using, those of you who are in junior squash, we've had phantom points. We've tried to recreate rankings from 0. And largely, we've been pretty successful. Participation has gradually increased in our junior tournaments. And I would say that we're really back right now. We're back to how the pre-pandemic junior squash used to be. I hope, Kevin, this is the last time that this is on one of our presentation slides, and that although COVID has not gone away and we may get thrown some curveballs during the season, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to continue with our traditional junior system. I think from an adult point of view, we're starting to see adults coming back onto the court. They've been a little more reticent to play and to compete. But I think during, hopefully after the summer anyway, when people have finished their golf and tennis, they'll get back to their leagues, and the district leagues will be getting back to those levels too. We did have leagues last year. I would say they're around about 75% of participation levels from before. So we are hopeful we get to the new season, and then we can start to move forward again with our squash at all levels and all types of squash. Thank you. I think one of the things that we did discover during COVID, though, we tested out using ratings and skill level play, and we learned quite a lot from that lesson. We learned that if you want to keep things local, the skill level play worked very well. If you want to have some activity at the lower level, the onboarding level, the newer players at the skill level work very well. And if you're a group and you want to come and play and you want to have some meaningful play, the skill levels work very well. And when you look at our junior structure on the left here with the pyramid, and we have our traditional bronze, silver, gold level based on points. But again, that works very well when you have a lot of players, when you're in an area where you can have a lot of people from the same age group. it works well when you're an individual trying to go up the rankings. So I think the two of them are very, the skill level tournaments, points level tournaments work very well together. And the challenges that the point system have really you can use a rating system. So the rating system's a hidden gem that we have. And I think this year, looking forward, I'm really excited to work with the rating system. We'll have a universal squash rating, which will show on people's profiles in a more prominent position. People will be able to see where they stand, whether it's a club, whether it's a state, whether it's a US squash, whether it's an age group. So it's another way to provide meaningful competition for people who might otherwise not be able to do so because we've only ever had to this date the pyramid structure of the bronze, silver, gold. So hopefully you'll start to see some more marketing and some material regarding the universal squash rating, and we're going to try to make sure that those players who have not been able to really make the most of a point system can now have another alternative pathway where they can get their ranking and meaningful competition. So look out for that as we progress through the season. And I think Kevin just said earlier that the Spectre Center is a lot of what we do, but not all of what we do. Certainly this year, it's been very helpful to us. We have hosted many tournaments, many of our national championships, and this shows a timeline of the activity that we've seen here. And you can see a lot of our national championships starting with the US Junior Open in December, all the way through to the one that we'll host this year, and all our national championships alongside it. But it's been great to have the center, obviously, from an event point of view. What better spaces there in the world to host an event? We've learned a lot every time that we've done an event. Every event, we tend to get a little bit better as we learn more and more about the facility and how to use it. But we don't just do tournaments here. You can see we have special event nights. We had just last Friday hosted a national coach night where we celebrated our Team USA. We had a Hall of Fame back in March where we opened up our Hall of Fame. We're going to be hosting a Women's Squash Week here, a Teams event here, and I think we'll see other special events as we progress through the season. And one of the things that I'm actually quite excited to see right now is the high performance programming. So right now we have international players here, PSA players, but we also have our own HPPs, our under 23 group, our college players, and our juniors as well, some of our top juniors, and they're all playing together. And I think that was a vision of this center when it was started, to be able to integrate all these levels, and in that way, hopefully we all get better together. More on that program again as we progress through the season. But yes, Spectre Center definitely helps us with our best practices as well. We have our own programs here, but it's good also as we look to improve our women's squash programming or our doubles programming or our community affiliate programming. We can test that all out here and see if it works and how to make it better. And then hopefully we can then go out to those communities and improve it for them also. So more to come. Over to you, Kevin.
So that concludes the formal part of our presentation, and wanted to officially conclude the annual meeting of the members and then continue on for Q&A. It looks like we've got at least half an hour. Can I have a motion to formally conclude this year's annual meeting of the members?
So moved, Kevin. Dan, Regan.
Great, Dan, a second. All
And
right,
got a
thanks,
thumbs up
Howard.
as well. So
All right.
Kevin, I'm going to bring up the poll, allowing people to vote. We have a motion to adjourn the annual meeting of the members, and then we'll move into the Q&A portion of the session. Everyone should see it on their screens now.
All right.
Kevin, people do look eager to adjourn, but I don't think it has anything to do with the presentation. So we will end the poll there.
I think I pay you to say that.
Okay.
So,
Yep, and the ayes have it, Kevin.
all right. Thank you, everybody. And let's open it up to questions. Dan, I'm not sure how you want to coordinate that.
Yeah, so again, people are welcome to either send me a direct message. There's a chat button at the bottom of your screen. You're welcome to send me a message there, or if you raise your hand, we're happy to bring your audio and or video up, and you can ask questions directly. Kevin, as we let a question or two come in, I did have one emailed to me. It was someone asking, what is Safe Sport and how it affects US Squash?
Sure,
Kim, can I? Yeah, go ahead.
I'll let Kim handle it, definitely.
She's done all the work on it.
He does all the work, yeah.
Safe Sport. What is Safe Sport? Safe Sport is effectively a child safety protection program that the US, I think, that is led by the USOPC, the US Center for Safe Sport. We have to make sure that all of our staff who have any interaction with children have to take this course, a child safety course, so they understand when they can see things like bullying or harassment of any particular type. It's really important that we do that. It's really important that the people out there who need to do it, such as our coaches, that they're also aware of this programming and this certification. And it just makes the whole environment a lot safer for our kids when they play. So kind of, in a summary, that's kind of what it is. If you're at an event, you may see some coaches with something around their neck that says they're Safe Sport trained, and we only allow Safe Sport trained coaches into events.
Thanks, Kim.
I hope that helps. Let me know.
So Kevin, I've got one to pass to you. We were asked again via email, how would you characterize the state of the health of the college squash community currently?
I would characterize it as healthy. Certainly, we had a bit of a scare during, somewhat coincidentally, during COVID, with several programs announcing that they would be cutting their varsity programs. Most of them, but for Brown and George Washington, ended up bringing them back. And a few programs were added, like Georgetown. So, we have been hovering, though, in that range of roughly 30 to 34 programs, women and men, at the varsity level. And I think it was a useful wake-up call for the community in general to say, look, we can't take for granted that these programs will be funded and supported within the administrations. We need to present squash as being, just like any other sport, part of the fabric of the school, part of the fabric of the athletic departments, et cetera. So I think the CSA has responded quite well to that. We consider ourselves extremely close partners with them in terms of how and what to communicate with athletic departments and administrations, et cetera. And really, to a degree, sort of work hand in glove. So, for example, we will very much be more active in supporting activity taking place at collegiate squash facilities, just general community-based activity that may ultimately lead to some emerging intramural or other programs that ultimately compete outside of the school that could become club programs and then ultimately varsity programs. That's a long trajectory, but college squash, the CSA itself, is focused on really the high caliber and the integrity of the varsity programs. So I think we're sort of dividing and conquering, but also sharing this continuum of making sure there's activity and that ultimately it's flowing towards, varsity programming and just representing sport very well within the athletic department. So we're trying to sort of make sure we're shoring up our base with good communications, but also focused on whatever we can do for growth. And, I think CSA's strategy is much more, okay, what are our top 10 prospects of club programs that we can get over the hurdle to become varsity? That's where their focus will be. And ours is sort of from the bottom up to say, what activity can we generate in order to get activity, which is just good in general, and also activity to the point where there's a club team that ultimately might be able to be converted. And one thing we do know from our research is that most of the adult players are people who came to the game in college or after college, because there's the ability to continue to get better over time, really into your 50s and even 60s. So we think making sure more and more people are introduced to the sport in college is an important priority.
Thanks, Kevin. Kim, I'm going to pass the next one to you. We did have a question about the women and girls programming that was mentioned in the presentation by both of you, and just hearing a little bit of detail, some of the things that that you and some of the program staff are beginning to work on and think about in that area.
Yeah, sure. The Women and Girls Initiative, this will be led by Narelle Krozek. I think it's the first time we've had someone who's actually dedicated to women's programming. So that's pretty exciting that we should be able to make an impact. Now we have someone dedicated to it. We've always had pretty solid programming in terms of events like having Hal Cup and having Women's Squash Week. Those kind of underpin a lot of our women's programming. But what we'd like to do now is we focus on getting more female coaches, because if you don't, you need to see it to be it, right? And if you don't have any female coaches, like what are the girls out there seeing? So one of the things that we're working on is certainly teaching more females to coach, but also coaching everybody in how to coach girls. Girls are different from boys. And if you want to retain the girls to play, then we need to be teaching to how they want to hear it. So that's another module that we'll add to our certifications program. We'll be adding a women's summit in September, where we'll look at having some speakers. You can also speak to how you can approach a girl, what challenges they have, and to give people tools to help girls play and stay playing. We have another program in March, which is a Bring a Buddy Day. We all know that girls like to talk to each other, they like to socialize, and the girls are more likely to stay in an activity if they have their friends in that activity. So a lot of what we'll be looking at is programming that's specific to women and girls, things that they like to do. You know, we judge the success quite often of programming through tournaments and participation in tournaments. Is that the right way to be judging the success of women's squash? Or should we be looking at it in a different way and looking at how many women are just participating in their local programs and their local round robins that they may have? So having somebody who's focusing on women specifically, I think will help tremendously with getting more people playing, more women and girls engaged in squash, and then keeping them playing in squash. So again, we are starting that strategy now, and I'm sure you'll all be hearing a little bit more from Narelle as she really gets her hands into that role.
Great, that's helpful, Kim. Thank you. Kevin, we have a couple questions on this one topic. First one came in from Tim Dernley, president of the Phillies District Association, and I would like to call out, I know we have a bunch of district leaders who are on this call, and thank you all for joining and all the work you're doing locally. But Tim asked, and followed up by a couple others, for an Olympic update, Kevin, on kind of state of the bid process for LA 2028 and where that stands currently.
Sure. LA 28. So Paris 2024 has a fixed program. They actually have, I believe, more than 10,500 athletes, which has been sort of the magic number for a few decades now. And the International Olympic Committee has set that as a future hard cap now for LA and Brisbane 2032 and likely into the future. At the same time, I think the IOC, they recognize that their mix of sports and disciplines maybe isn't optimal. You know, at the end of the day, they want to make sure that the Olympic movement is relevant to the world today. And so what they've undergone in partnership with LA is both a review of the 30 or 28 sports that, or 30 sports that are within expected to be within the games, and a review of all the disciplines within those sports. And then separately looking at a short list of sports to consider for adding. Ultimately though, only 10,500 athletes will be able to participate in LA 28. So the timeframes for that are a lot of work being done in crunching the data around which sports would be the best fit. And I think it's safe to say that, you know, how commercially oriented they are is definitely an important factor. There are other factors such as, you know, how competitive, how diverse they are, how many countries they're in, whether they represent equality and equity within between genders. So the timeframes for those are the evaluation process of all the disciplines of the current sports will go from now through next spring. And then in parallel, within a week or two, likely a short list will be announced of sports considered for LA 28 to be added. It's unclear what sports, how many sports would be added and under what formats, but a short list of sports to be considered. That's called a request for information. If we're on that short list, which we hope we will be, but there definitely no guarantees. There's a lot of competition. If we're on that short list, that RFI process culminates in a presentation probably in September, perhaps October. These timelines have tended to slip a little bit. And then again, the decision by LA 28 and the IOC wouldn't be announced until late next spring, likely at the earliest. So it's a multi-step process. We're hoping to get over the first hurdle in the next few weeks. We'll see. Even if we do get over the next hurdle, it'll be a pretty quick process, but likely fairly intense to sort of present our case. But then we won't know anything until, beginning of next summer. I would just add that we're working very closely with WSF, who officially leads the campaign and engagement with LA 28 and IOC. And the PSA Tour, both men's and women's tour, are an incredible resource, and so it's very much a kind of a three-way partnership on that.
Thanks, Kevin. Shift the next one to membership here, and I think Kevin, you and I can take this one together. This from Dan Reagan in Massachusetts, been a longtime district leader in the Massachusetts area, talking about with the potential dues increase, what communications we're going to be focused on selling that and helping people understand the U.S. Squash value proposition, indicating that so much of our base of members are, local club and facility players participating in local district leagues. Obviously, Massachusetts is a great example of that. But some of them maybe not as aware of what U.S. Squash is doing for them. So maybe if you want to talk a little bit about some of the value proposition and in technology and organization leagues and others, and I can talk a little on the communication side.
Sure. It's obviously a good question. It's also a difficult one to answer, extremely directly, because everyone thinks of the organization in a different way. We kind of think of, when I think of coming back from the pandemic, and I think, gosh, if we didn't have the Specter Center, where would we be? We would be absolutely nowhere. We wouldn't have been able to host most of our national championships. There would have been no anchor to what we were doing. And ultimately, I would have been a lot more worried about our ability as an organization to come back. And sort of similarly, I kind of think of U.S. Squash in that way, to say, while often taken for granted, what would the sport be without the national governing body? We wouldn't have junior development programs. There wouldn't be an interest to sort of boil up to the top to compete on junior national teams. We wouldn't have fielding national teams internationally. We wouldn't have national championships. We wouldn't have a Hall of Fame. We wouldn't have shared standards or ratings or rankings. There'd basically be no infrastructure to maintain the sport, which would effectively, marginalize it, and likely it would die on the vine, is sort of my general sense. So, while it's not viewed as an essential, spend, it is essential. And so in terms of marketing that, I think everyone's quite different. And while our core is league players throughout the winter, I'm pretty confident that we can reach them in a proactive way to say, look, here's how we're relevant and why, not just from us, but, we're going to present you with videos and quick messages from people who are influential in your community to say, look, now is the time for the sport to rally around the organization, around its efforts to promote gender parity, around its efforts to increase the college game, to get more public high school teams, and also to support your league activity and enhance your experience at your facility. So that's sort of in a nutshell, and it's kind of an all of the above strategy. probably one of our biggest weaknesses is our marketing and communications. And Dent, it's no criticism of you at all. It's simply we've been working so much on sort of the value proposition. We haven't necessarily shifted to say, hey, let's speak to people in a way that they're willing and able to sort of hear it. So we know we've got our work cut out sort of through the summer to kind of come out, post Labor Day to say, here's who we are, here's why it's important to be part of US Squash, whether it be a member or a contributor. And really they do go hand in glove. We have to be a lot more effective in terms of presenting our case in terms of why support US Squash as a nonprofit. And so we're gonna be upping our game on that level too. We can get into the facts of we've literally had 4,800 updates in the last 7 years to our system, and the capabilities of it are wide, and they all accrete value to districts, to facilities, to teaching pros and coaches, to tournament directors, and ultimately to members. Again, we just have to kind of put that in front of people and make sure they reflect on it. And my guess is some people on this call are like me, where my club is saying, we're actually going to charge you an extra $48 each month for the next year in order to help us recover from COVID. So, I think I'm not saying that's what's going on here. I think we're on a relatively even trajectory, cost of living / inflation / services delivered. But, that's where we are, and it's the member support of the organization, a membership organization. It's essential. Without it, we really can't do anything.
So Kim, if you could, we talked through kind of the recovery piece, and you spoke to, on the junior side, we were just speaking about adult leagues, a little bit like that. I think we had a question about the focus on squash ratings. I think you began to touch on what that means and leaning in more on the ratings-based tournaments. Can you speak a little bit to the effort at kind of localization and how that can reduce costs for certain players and lower the barriers to entry into those kind of rating level tournaments before they engage on a more national level?
Yes, I can. So if you're a new player to squash and you want to play a tournament and you live in, I don't know, middle of the country somewhere, you're new, an emerging area in the middle of the country, you just started, there's a couple of clubs there, just a few players there. How do you get some competition? How do you start your journey? Traditionally, we'd say, oh, go play that bronze tournament. So like, well, what is that? Well, to play the bronze tournament, you're going to need to have membership, and you're going to need to do ref tests. You're going to need to do those are the two main things. So there's a cost involved, the membership fee, the ref test fee, the tournament fee, and this is your first tournament. So that's a pretty high barrier and a pretty high bar to be asking someone. So instantly you want to compete, you have to play in our points-based system, which is great when you're invested in the system, not necessarily great when you're starting out. So if you're looking at for a different way, that's kind of a softer approach, you can go and play in that skill level tournament. You can play some other people who are also beginners. You don't have to have all these other barriers for entry. You can have a tournament that's in your club, that's in your city or your town. You don't have to travel to it. You can go back to your own bed at night. So you can start your journey in competition in a much less intense environment just by looking at a skill level tournament. If you are in an area which doesn't have that many players in your age group, you play in a points-based system. There could be 3 of you or 4 of you in under 15s, and one of you is really good and one of you is a beginner. What kind of experience is that? Would it be better to play somebody who's more at your playing level? So I think the points-based system is very successful at what it does, but it's not right for everybody. I think if you're like a recreational player or you're not sure if you want to really play, you can get good, meaningful play against different age groups, different genders in your local town. When you put together the whole aggregate of your community, then that's a lot more than the people who are in your age group. So just by having access to more people, because it's about your playing level, not about your age or your gender, I think you open yourself up to being able to play, to get some competition, play a match, get it recorded, and go home, as opposed to what we currently have, which is, well, actually, you might not get into that bronze tournament because it's not full, or you may have to go and travel to that gold tournament across the country because that's the only way you can play at your level. So I just think it gives more options to people. They can choose what's right for them in their environment. You know, do they have enough players? Do they have enough clubs, enough courts? So it gives us a chance to, I think, to grow the game in areas that currently the points-based system for juniors won't allow us to do. And we want to grow the game everywhere in the country, not just in the places that have a high population of clubs or courts or people. And I think having the two options will allow us to do that and cater for everyone, whatever they want to get out of the sport. I hope that answers the question, but if not, obviously, let me know.
I think that's helpful, Kim. And Kevin, I think we just have one more question. This is from Sunil Desai. It's just instrumental in support of the equal prize money at the U.S. Championships we held last week, and we hope a lot of you got a chance to watch that. He indicated the USTA does not charge membership dues currently for juniors in their first 3 years, and that it would greatly help grow junior squash to do something like that, and perhaps considering a 1 year no membership dues for juniors, depending on budgetary constraints. Wondered if you were able to address that.
I mean, it's certainly ideal. There's no question. You know, I think it's a tough comparison, tennis to squash. You know, they're 30x our size and have a couple $100 million US Open event. But conceptually, absolutely. I think Kim mentioned, you know, it's a pretty high barrier if you want to kind of get into competitions as a kid. I went through that with my daughter in her first bronze tournament this year. So firsthand experience to say, wow, that's a pretty high bar. So I think with the dues increase and with, you know, things stabilizing post-COVID, the Specter Center, et cetera, and an increased focus on fundraising to drive our growth, you know, that definitely is an important step to say, you know, what's a very low cost on-ramp. And it couples up well with community squash affiliate programs that basically have subsidized memberships as well. So, you know, definitely the mindset. You know, I think we're gonna have to see how this fall plays out. We're probably at our most constrained financially just because we're coming out of COVID and a big construction project. So, you know, I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, but it's definitely, you know, a really valid point. And you know, over and over again, you know, you can kind of get caught up in the U.S. Olympic Committee and high performance and national teams and et cetera. But at the end of the day, you know, you need a big pipeline for the health of the sport. And the pipeline is young kids and keep getting them engaged and keeping them engaged. And if they can't afford it, don't have access to it, you're stuck. So
can I just add to that? That's why these ratings and skill level tournaments, universal sports rating tournaments, I think are so important, because we can add that flexibility. You don't have to be invested in the sport to the level of our national ranking system. You can actually play in other tournaments which are local, which don't necessarily require you to have membership. So you can get that experience at a lower cost before you, and then make the decision when you're ready to make the decision. We kind of force it right now. And I think that having other options will help in that regard to what Sunil is saying.
Perfect, Kim, thank you. Kevin, I currently don't have any other questions, but I wanted to give people a chance to raise their hand if there's anything else that people wanted to cover here. All right, Kevin, well, I think I'll hand it over to you if you have any closing thoughts or comments that you'd like to cover here.
I don't have any closing remarks other than thanks for calling in. And we're happy to be sort of gearing back up for a normal summer and a really fulsome season next year. It's been mentioned a few times in terms of the districts and their role. It's a critical one. And you know, one we think we've improved on in terms of the relationship and need to continue to, as I mentioned, you know, one of our 4 priorities is our relationships. and having our goals aligned and sort of knowing who's pulling on what oar is really important. And we're going to continue to do that as well. Thank you, everybody. Have a great summer. Keep your hand in the game, and we'll see you next season.